full of crystal glasses, clinking laughter, and the kind of champagne that comes in bottles you don't even see in regular liquor stores. Everyone was dressed like they were posing for some catalog nobody I know gets in the mail. The room had that artificial warmth to it, like everyone was pretending to be closer than they actually were, and I was just about holding it together near the shrimp platter when Sam walked over in heels too high and a tone too sharp. "Don't embarrass me tonight, Dad. Just smile and stay quiet," she said, leaning in close enough so I could smell whatever expensive perfume she wore these days, something sharp and citrusy, not the vanilla stuff she used to steal from her mom's dresser when she was 15. Her voice was low, but the sting in it was loud. She didn't even wait for my response. Just patted my shoulder like I was some old neighbor she barely knew and turned back toward her perfect crowd. Her fiancé Brad was laughing in that moneyed way guys like him do, just enough volume, just enough charm, just enough phoniness. So I smiled. I stayed quiet, just like she asked. I stood in the back like an afterthought, clutching a sweating glass of something expensive I didn't ask for, watching strangers toast to a future built on a lie I hadn't quite confirmed yet, but I had my suspicions. Sam looked radiant, sure, but there was something in her smile that reminded me of her mother. Tight, calculated, performative. She was working the room like a politician, dropping jokes and compliments, floating from table to table like she was running for mayor. And not once, did she mention me. Every "thank you" was directed toward Brad's parents. Every story started with "Brad and I." Never, "my dad once told me," or "growing up, my dad used to say." It wasn't just the forgetting. It was the erasing. I don't need a goddamn trophy for raising my kid. But I also didn't spend 2 decades busting my back in construction, eating off paper plate dinners so she could afford violin lessons and theater camp, just to be airbrushed out of her life like a bad tattoo. I felt it bubbling just under the skin. The rage. The kind that simmers low for years until something stupid sets it off, like being told to stay quiet at your only daughter's engagement party. I took a long sip of that overpriced scotch, let it burn its way down, and let my eyes scan the room. Brad was chatting up some guy in a golf sweater, looking too polished for his own good. I'd been watching him for months. Not in some obsessive way, just observing. Quietly. Because something about him never sat right with me. The stories never lined up. The timelines always fell off. Once, over Thanksgiving, I heard him take a call outside. Said it was business. But his voice got real soft. Real familiar. A kind of softness you reserve for someone you're sleeping with. I didn't jump to conclusions. I'm not that kind of man. But I started checking things. Nothing fancy. Just basic stuff. Google searches. Background checks. Some mild PI work from a buddy of mine who owed me a favor. And what I found, it didn't paint Brad as the loyal golden boy everyone here thought he was. But I didn't blow it all up right away. I waited, like she asked. I stayed quiet. Until tonight. I reached into my coat pocket, fingers brushing against the paper I'd folded earlier that day. It wasn't long, less than a page, but it had everything it needed. Dates. Names. A photo. A copy of an email that proved more than I needed it to. All the cards on the table, plain as day. I'd gone back and forth about whether to confront her. But Sam didn't want that. She didn't want a scene. So I gave her what she asked for. Brad was mid-conversation when I walked up, glass in one hand, letter in the other, palm slick with sweat. I gave him a firm pat on the back, the way fathers do when they're proud or pretending to be. I slipped the letter into his inner jacket pocket, right behind a monogrammed handkerchief I bet he never used. He didn't even flinch. Just smiled at me, probably wondering if I was finally coming around. I nodded, smiled back, said nothing. The party carried on like nothing happened. Laughter. Music. More toasts. Sam didn't look back at me once. And I stood there, invisible in a rented blazer, feeling something between guilt and satisfaction. I didn't say a word that night, but the letter sure did. The phone rang at 6:23 the next morning, and I knew it was her before I even picked it up, just from the rhythm of the ringtone, the way it shattered the silence like a rock through stained glass. I'd barely slept, Just sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of reheated coffee and replaying the night in my head, not with regret exactly, but with a strange heaviness in my chest that felt like both relief and dread tangled together. When I finally answered, Sam didn't even say hello. "He's gone," she said, her voice cracked and urgent, like someone trying not to cry but failing miserably. "Brad's gone. He left early this morning. Didn't say anything. His stuff's gone, the suitcases, his toothbrush, everything. He left a voicemail, like he didn't even have the balls to talk to me." I rubbed my temple with one hand, trying to sound confused, trying to play it off like I wasn't 5 steps ahead of her. "Gone?" I asked, keeping my voice low, steady. "What do you mean gone?" "He just left," she snapped, frustration bleeding through her panic. "He said he needed to think. That there were things I didn't know. Things that were coming to light." "What the hell does that even mean?" I gave her a pause long enough to sound surprised, long enough to sound like the kind of father who didn't just nuke her engagement from the inside out less than 12 hours ago. "I'm sorry, Sam," I finally said, slowly, carefully. "I really don't know what to tell you." And I didn't. Not yet, anyway. What I didn't say was that I'd seen this coming, not because I was some paranoid dad with trust issues, but because I'd followed my gut when no one else would. Months ago, maybe 6 or 7, I had this gnawing feeling in my chest that something about Brad was off. Not in a cartoon villain way. He was charming, smooth, good at pretending, but in a way that left little cracks when you looked close enough. He always had answers, but they were too polished. He always had time for Sam, but never on the weekends. And one Saturday, when he told her he was off at some work retreat in Denver, I decided to take a drive. I remember it was a 6-hour drive each way, took me about 4.5 hours total. Don't ask me how. Let's just say I wasn't exactly obeying the speed limit or stopping for scenic overlooks. I just drove, full tank, no music, just the hum of the tires and the beating of my heart picking up with every mile. Brad had told Sam he was staying in a Lodge 4 team building, but the address I had from a previous Amazon delivery he stupidly sent to her place told me otherwise. I pulled up outside a modest 2-story house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy. Nothing suspicious. Except when I rang the doorbell, a woman answered wearing one of those big t-shirts women wear when they've clearly just rolled out of a man's bed. Her hair was tied up in that lazy, I just got laid kind of way, and she looked at me like I was the cable guy. "Can I help you?" she asked, not unkindly, but definitely surprised. I gave her a name, some made-up one, and pretended I had the wrong address. She laughed a little and said, "You're probably looking for Brad. He just ran out to get coffee." That was all I needed. I didn't blow up. I didn't take pictures. I didn't scream or tell her the man she was sleeping with was engaged to someone else 400 miles away. I just turned around, got in my truck, and drove home with that image seared into my brain, the image of that woman in Brad's house, acting like she lived there. Like she belonged there. Back in the present, Sam was spiraling. She texted. Called again. Said she couldn't eat, couldn't think, couldn't figure out how someone could just go without warning. It pissed me off, not because I was angry with her, but because I hated seeing her hurt, and I hated even more that it had come to this. I didn't want to destroy her night. I didn't want her to cry into her engagement cake. But she hadn't given me any other choice. She made it clear, over and over again, that my place in her life was ornamental at best, like a family photo you keep around so people don't ask questions. And maybe that's why I didn't tell her what I'd found when I found it. Maybe that's why I waited until it could no longer be ignored. Because sometimes, when the people you love won't listen, the only thing you can do is drop the truth into their lap and walk away. Later that afternoon, she called again, and this time her voice was hoarse. She'd clearly been crying or yelling or maybe both. "Dad," she said, quieter now, like someone defeated. Did you know something about Brad?" I looked out the window at the bare trees swaying in the wind, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. There were a dozen things I wanted to say. I wanted to scream that I'd been trying to protect her all along, that I saw this coming, that Brad was nothing but a 2-bit liar in a tailored suit. But I didn't. I kept my voice even and said, "I just smiled and stayed quiet, Sam." Like she asked. It was 3 days after the engagement party, and the air had already shifted between us, heavy and uncertain, like a thunderstorm you can feel coming in your bones, but can't quite see yet. I hadn't heard from Sam since that last phone call where she asked me if I knew anything, and I gave her the line she once handed to me like a commandment: just smile and stay quiet. I figured she needed time to wrap her head around things, maybe sort out fact from emotion, or maybe just sit with the kind of silence that says more than any shouting match ever could. But when she finally texted me that afternoon, it wasn't a talk. It was just a single sentence: "I'm going to find him." And she did. She found Brad downtown, holed up in some sleek boutique hotel near the business district, the kind of place that has glass elevators and $16 cocktails and smells like new money and disappointment. She didn't tell me all the details, but I pieced it together later from what little she said and what the private investigator I'd hired filled in later. She walked into the lobby, saw him by the bar, and called his name. He turned, looked surprised for just half a second, then something colder settled in his face, like all the charm he used to wear like a tailored suit had been peeled off and tossed aside. According to her, he didn't even let her get a full sentence out. He just said, "Your dad knows everything," and walked past her like she was an ex-colleague from a job he quit years ago. No explanation, no apology, no attempt to fix the mess he'd made. Just that one line, "Your dad knows everything," and the sound of his footsteps leaving the scene like it was already on fire. What Sam didn't know yet, what I hadn't told her, was that I'd known a lot more than she imagined. This wasn't just about a fling or a misunderstanding or some minor character flaw that could be ironed out with a couple therapy sessions. This was deeper, worse, and I hadn't stumbled across it by accident. It started back in November, during Thanksgiving dinner, when Brad stepped outside to take a phone call. Everyone else was too deep in pie and wine to notice anything, but something in me had always watched him closer than the rest. I followed him quietly onto the porch, staying just inside the screen door. I wasn't even trying to eavesdrop, not at first, but the words were sharp and loud enough to cut through the wind. "No, I can't see you this weekend," he said, voice low but tense. "I told you already. It's her family thing. Just keep things calm until I figure this out." I remember every word like it was tattooed across my brain. That was when I called in a favor from a guy I used to work with back when I did framing jobs in my 20s. He'd moved on to PI work, mostly divorce cases, sometimes tracking down deadbeat dads or runaways. I gave him Brad's full name, what little I had on him, and a week later I got a file thick enough to flatten a squirrel. The truth was worse than I thought. Brad wasn't just seeing someone else, he was still legally married to a woman in Ohio. Divorce in progress, yes, but not finalized, not even close. And to make it sting harder, he had a 4-year-old son. The kid had his eyes. Same smirk, same sandy hair. I saw the photos. They were living in a house he paid for in cash, listed under his sister's name. His business trips were weekends spent playing house with a different family, while my daughter, my only daughter, was planning centerpieces and cake flavors with his name printed on every invitation. The letter I slipped into his jacket had all of it. I didn't embellish. I didn't editorialize. I included photocopies of the marriage license, court filings, timestamps on photos, and even a transcript of one phone call my buddy managed to capture. It was surgical, quiet, deadly. The kind of truth you don't scream, you just drop it on the table and let it explode on its own. So when Brad told Sam, "Your dad knows everything," what he really meant was, your dad finally stopped protecting you from the truth. She called me an hour after she left that hotel. I could hear the wind rushing past her phone, which meant she was walking fast, probably somewhere outside, trying to get the poison out of her lungs. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said, her voice jagged with hurt. I paused. Not to be dramatic, but because I honestly didn't know which version of the truth she was ready to hear. The one where I was trying to protect her? The one where I didn't think she'd believe me? The one where I knew she'd blame me either way? "You told me to stay quiet," I said, calm as I could manage. She didn't respond for a long beat. I thought maybe the call had dropped. But then I heard it, the sound of her breath shaking like it was barely staying inside her chest. "You ruined my life," she screamed, and the call cut out before I could say another word. The fourth night after the engagement party, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, the old wooden one that still had a burn mark from that time Sam left a curling iron plugged in when she was 16 and in a rush to get to some school dance. It was just past midnight, the house dead quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the low hum of the refrigerator kicking in like it always did when the silence got too heavy. In front of me sat a half-empty bottle of whiskey I hadn't touched since the day my father passed, and beside it was a glass that had already been filled twice too many times. I wasn't drunk, not yet anyway, but I was floating somewhere in that dangerous middle space between sober and gone, where your thoughts start getting loud and your regrets start playing on a loop so clear you'd swear they were real. I sat there and stared at the photo still taped to the fridge, the one from Sam's 8th birthday when she insisted on a pirate-themed party, and I built a cardboard ship in the backyard with my own 2 hands. In the photo, she's wearing an eye patch, holding a cupcake with both hands, frosting smeared across her cheek, laughing like life hadn't yet taught her how to be disappointed. I remembered the night I taught her to ride a bike, how she cried when she scraped her knee, and how she got back on anyway because I promised I'd never let go unless she said I could. And I remembered how, years later, I did let go, not just of the bike, but of the version of her who used to run toward me instead of away. I remembered every dance recital where I clapped louder than anyone else, even when she missed a step. I remembered the day she stopped hugging me goodbye, switching instead to a distracted wave or a half smile, too busy texting someone to notice the small shift in the air between us. Now here I was, all these years later, drinking to ghosts and waiting for a phone call that probably wouldn't come. When the knock at the door came, I thought for a second I was imagining it. I hadn't had visitors in weeks, not counting the mailman who always smelled like chewing tobacco and complained about politics. I pulled myself from the chair slowly, joints creaking louder than the floorboards, and opened the door to find Karen standing there in that long black coat of hers, hair pulled back tight like she always did when she was tense. We hadn't spoken face to face in months, maybe longer. The last time had been civil enough, something about Sam's graduation plans, something about flights, but we both knew we didn't like pretending anymore. She didn't wait for an invitation. Just walked in like she still lived there, brushing past me with the kind of confidence only someone who knows your deepest failings can pull off. "She's not doing well," she said, not looking at me, just scanning the living room like she was checking to see if I'd let the place go. "She's blaming herself now. Thinks she ruined everything." I didn't answer, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't trust my voice to sound anything but hollow. Karen turned to me finally, her eyes a little red around the edges, like she'd either been crying or drinking or both. "I told her things," she said quietly, almost too quiet. "Years ago, when we were fighting. I said some things about you I shouldn't have said. That you weren't worth much. That you were never there." The words didn't shock me. I'd suspected for a long time that part of the distance between me and Sam came from more than just growing up and moving on. It was built by years of whispers, little lies told in anger that festered into truth with enough repetition. I wanted to be angry, to yell, or at least throw a glass, but I just sat back down at the kitchen table and poured another drink. Karen watched me for a long moment, then gave a bitter little laugh and said, "Congratulations. You won." Then she walked back out into the cold night without another word, the door clicking shut behind her like the end of something permanent. I sat there a while longer, staring at the glass in my hand, at the photo on the fridge, at the way time doesn't stop for anyone, not even fathers who tried their best, but still came up short. Then, just as I was thinking of calling it a night and dragging myself to bed, my phone lit up on the counter. One text. One word. "Why?" I didn't move for a long time. Just stared at that glowing screen, that single syllable packed with more weight than anything she'd ever said to me before. Why now? Why like this? Why didn't I tell her sooner? Why did I let it all fall apart? The whiskey didn't answer. The silence didn't offer anything either. But maybe, just maybe, that question meant there was still something left to say. I started writing the letter before the sun came up, before the world outside had the decency to offer any distractions, before the streets filled with noise and the morning news rolled in with its steady drip of tragedies. I wrote it by hand because that's the only way I know how to make something feel real. Typing it wouldn't have done it justice, wouldn't have slowed me down enough to think about every word, wouldn't have made me pause long enough to feel every sentence twist in my chest the way it was supposed to. The letter wasn't meant to change her mind or win her over or undo everything that had already happened. It was just meant to be honest. For once, brutally, completely, quietly honest. "Dear Sam," I began, and then stared at the page like it owed me something. I told her everything, how it started with a gut feeling I couldn't ignore, the kind of instinct that comes from raising a child and knowing when something about the people around them just doesn't sit right. I told her how I listened carefully at Thanksgiving when Brad stepped outside to take a phone call and didn't realize I could hear every word he said, how he mentioned keeping things calm and needing a little more time. How he talked like a man living two different lives and juggling both like glass balls he couldn't afford to drop. I wrote about how I didn't want to believe it at first, how I tried convincing myself that maybe I was overthinking, that maybe I was just being one of those bitter, overprotective dads who couldn't let go. But I couldn't shake the feeling, and so I did what you do when you love someone who won't protect themselves. I started digging. I didn't snoop through your phone or follow you around or hack anything. I just followed breadcrumbs. Old addresses, records, digital footprints. Things people like Brad never think about because they assume no one's paying attention. But I was paying attention, Sam. I always have been. Even when it didn't look like it. I told her about the drive, about how I made it to Ohio in under 5 hours, even though it should have taken 6. How I knocked on the door and met a woman who answered it with bare feet and sleepy eyes, who smiled like she was used to answering that door for Brad. How I saw the photo of their son on the shelf in the living room through the crack in the door. Same eyes, same smile. There's no mistaking that kind of resemblance, not when you're a father. You learn to recognize the shape of a child's face when it carries the blood of someone who lied to your daughter for 2 damn years. I told her how I didn't show up at the party planning to ruin it, how I wanted to keep it together, how I tried to smile and stay quiet like she asked. But I also told her that silence isn't the same as love. Sometimes silence is betrayal, and I wasn't going to be complicit in watching her build a life on quicksand while I stood on the sidelines pretending I didn't know better. I slipped the letter into his jacket because I knew he wouldn't tell her the truth. And I knew he wouldn't stay when faced with it. I ended the letter with the hardest truth I could offer, the one that had been sitting inside my chest like a stone since the day I saw her eyes fill with rage and hurt and confusion when Brad walked out. You didn't lose him because of me, Sam. You lost him because I told the truth. I folded the letter gently, slid it into an envelope, and wrote her name on the front like it was the last thing I'd ever write to her. And maybe it was. I didn't know. I had no idea what she would do when she read it. Throw it in the trash, rip it in half, burn it. But I had to give it to her. I had to say everything I never got to say in the moment, everything I swallowed for years while I watched her drift further away from the little girl who used to sit on my shoulders at parades and fall asleep in the back seat with her head against my arm. I drove to her apartment and parked across the street, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like it had weight, like it was alive and breathing. I watched the lights come on in her window just after 8. A few hours passed. No movement. Then a shadow. Then nothing. I thought maybe she wasn't going to come down. Thought maybe she saw me and decided to leave me there in that truck with my guilt and my letter and my broken version of love. But around 11, the door opened. She walked out slowly, like her body was being pulled forward by something she hadn't agreed to. She didn't have a purse. No keys in hand. Just herself. Her eyes found mine across the distance, and for a second neither of us moved. It felt like 100 years passed between that glance and her next step. She crossed the street and stopped just a few feet from me. Didn't say a word. Just pulled the envelope from her coat pocket and held it out. I took it from her slowly, our hands not quite touching, and when I looked up, she was staring right at me. There were no tears in her eyes. No fury. No forgiveness either. Just understanding. And for the first time in years, My daughter looked me in the eyes, but didn't say a word. Just like I taught her.